Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. Chapter 13. Well, I catched my breath and most fainting, shut up on a wreck with such a gang as that. But it warn't no time to be sentimentalin'. We got to find that boat now. Had to have it for ourselves. So we went a-quaking and shaking down the starboard side, and slow work it was too. Seemed a week before we got to the stern. No sign of a boat. Jim said he didn't believe he could go any further, so scared he hadn't hardly any strength left, he said. But I said, come on, if we get left on this wreck, we are in a fix, sure. So on we prowled again. We struck for the stern of the Texas and found it, and then scrabbled along forwards on the skylight, hanging on from shutter to shutter, for the edge of the skylight was in the water. When we got pretty close to the cross-hall door, there was the skiff. Sure enough, I could just barely see her. I felt ever so thankful. In another second, I would have been aboard of her, but just then the door opened. One of the men stuck his head out, only about a couple of foot from me, and I thought I was gone, but he jerked it in again and says, "Heave that blamed lantern out of sight, Bill." He flung a bag or something into the boat, and then got in himself and sat down. It was Packard. Then Bill, he come out and got in. Packard says in a low voice, "All ready? Shove off." I couldn't hardly hang on to the shutters. I was so weak. But Bill says, "Hold on. Did you go through him?" "No. Didn't you?" "No. So he's got his share of the cash yet." "Well then, come along. No use to take truck and leave money." "Say, won't he suspicion what we're up to?" "Maybe he won't, but we got to have it anyway. Come along." So they got out and went in. The door slammed to because it was on the careen side, and in a half a second I was in the boat, and Jim come a-tumbling after me. I out with my knife and cut the rope, and away we went. We didn't touch an oar, and we didn't speak nor whisper, nor hardly even breathe. We went gliding swift along, dead silent, past the tip of the paddle box and past the stern. Then in a second or two more we was 100 yards below the wreck, and the darkness soaked her up, every last light of her, and we was safe and knowed it. When we was 300 or 400 yards downstream, we saw the lantern show like a little spark at the Texas door for a second, and we knowed by that the rascals had missed their boat and was beginning to understand that they was in just as much trouble now as Jim Turner was. Then Jim manned the oars, and we took out after our raft. Now was the first time I begun to worry about the men. I reckon I hadn't had time to before. I begun to think how dreadful it was even for murderers to be in such a fix. I says to myself, there ain't no telling, but I might come to be a murderer myself yet, and then how would I like it? So I says to Jim, the first light we see will land 100 yards below it or above it, in a place where it's a good hiding place for you in the skiff. And then I'll go up and fix some kind of yarn and get somebody to go for that gang and get them out of their scrape so they can be hung when their time comes. But that idea was a failure, for pretty soon it begun to storm again, and this time worse than ever. The rain poured down, and never a light showed. Everybody in bed, I reckon. We boomed along down the river, watching for lights and watching for our raft. After a long time, the rain let up, but the clouds stayed, and the lightning kept whimpering, and by, a flash showed us a black thing ahead floating, and we made for it. It was the raft, and mighty glad was we to get aboard of it again. We seen a light now, away down to the right on shore, so I said I would go for it. The skiff was half full of plunder which the gang had stole, there on the wreck. We hustled it onto the raft in a pile, and I told Jim to float along down and show a light when he judged he had gone about 2 miles, and keep it burning till I come. Then I manned my oars and shoved for the light. As I got down towards it, 3 or 4 more showed, up on the hillside. It was a village. I closed in above the shore light and laid on my oars and floated. As I went by, I see it was a lantern hanging on the jackstaff of a double-hull ferry boat. I skimmed around for the watchman, wondering whereabouts he slept, and by and by I found him roosting on the bitts, forward with his head down between his knees. I give his shoulder 2 or 3 little shoves and begun to cry. He stirred up in a kind of a startlish way, but when he see it was only me, he took a good gaping stretch, and then he says, "Hello, what's up? Don't cry, bub. What's the trouble?" I says, "Pap and ma'am and sis and..." and then I broke down. He says, "Oh, dang it now, don't take on so. We all has to have our troubles, and this'll come out all right. What's the matter with them?" There, are you the watchman of the boat?" "Yes," he says, kind of pretty well satisfied like. "I'm the captain and the owner and the mate and the pilot and watchman and head deck hand, and sometimes I'm the freight and passengers. I ain't as rich as old Jim Hornback, and I can't be so blame generous and good to Tom, Dick, and Harry as what he is, and slam around money the way he does. But I've told him a many times I wouldn't trade places with him. For, says I, a sailor's life's the life for me, and I'm derned if I'd live 2 miles out of town where there ain't nothing ever going on. Not for all his spondulics and as much more on top of it," says I. I broke in and says, "There ain't an awful peck of trouble in..." "Who is?" "Why, Pap and Mam and Sis and Miss Hooker. And if you take your ferry boat and go up there..." "Up where? Where are they?" "On the wreck." "What wreck?" "Why, there ain't but one." "What? Don't you mean the Walter Scott?" "Yes." "Good land. What are they doing there, for gracious sakes?" "Well, they didn't go there a purpose." "I bet they didn't. Why, great goodness, there ain't no chance for them if they don't get off mighty quick. Why, how in the nation did they ever get into such a scrape?" "Easy enough. Miss Hooker was a visiting up there to the town." "Yes, Booth's Landing. Go on." "She was a visiting there at Booth's Landing, and just in the edge of the evening she started over with a nigger woman in the horse ferry to stay all night at her friend's house. Miss what you may call her, I disremember her name, and they lost their steering oar and swung around and went aloft and down stern first about 2 miles and saddle bagsed on the wreck. And the ferryman and the nigger woman and the horse was all lost. But Miss Hooker, she made a grab and got aboard the wreck. Well, about an hour after dark, we come along down in our trading scow, and it was so dark we didn't notice the wreck till we was right on it, and so we saddled bagsed. But all of us was saved but Bill Whipple, and oh, he was the best creature. I most wish it hadn't been me. I most wish it had been me, I do. My George, it's the beatin'est thing I ever struck. And then, what did you all do? Well, we hollered and took on, but it's so wide there we couldn't make nobody hear. So Pap said somebody got to get ashore and get hit up somehow. I was the only one that could swim, so I made a dash for it. And Miss Hooker said if I didn't strike help sooner, come here and hunt up her uncle and he'd fix the thing. I made the land about a mile below and been fooling along ever since, trying to get people to do something, but they said, "What? In such a night, in such a current? There ain't no sense in it. Go for the steam ferry. Now if you'll go and..." "By Jackson, I'd like to, and blame it, I don't know, but I will. But who in the ding nations are going to pay for it? Do you reckon your pap?" "Why, that's all right. Miss Hooker, she told me particular that her uncle Hornback..." "Great guns! Is he her uncle? Looky here. You break for that light over yonder way and turn out west when you get there. And about a quarter of a mile out, you'll come to the tavern. Tell them to dart you out to Jim Hornback's and he'll foot the bill. And don't you fool around any because he'll want to know the news. Tell him I'll have his niece and all safe before he can get to town. Hump yourself now. I'm a-going up around the corner here to roust out my engineer." I struck for the light, but as soon as he turned the corner, I went back and got into my skiff and bailed her out, and then pulled up ashore in the easy water about 600 yards, and tucked myself in among some wood boats, for I couldn't rest easy till I could see the ferry boat start. But take it all around, I was feeling rather comfortable on accounts of taking all this trouble for that gang, for not many would have done it. I wish the widow knowed about it. I judge she would be proud of me for helping these rapscallions, because rapscallions and deadbeats is the kind the widow and good people takes the most interest in. Well, before long, here comes the wreck, dim and dusky, sliding along down. A kind of cold shiver went through me, and I struck out for her. She was very deep, and I see in a minute there wasn't much chance for anybody being alive in her. I pulled all around her and hollered a little, but there wasn't any answer. All dead still. I felt a little bit heavy-hearted about the gang, but not much, for I reckoned if they could stand it, I could. Then here comes the ferry boat, so I shoved for the middle of the river on a long downstream slant, and when I judged I was out of eye reach, I laid on my oars and looked back and see her go and smell around the wreck for Miss Hooker's remainders, because the captain would know her uncle Horseback would want them. And then pretty soon the ferry boat give it up and went for shore, and I laid into my work and went a-booming down the river. It did seem a powerful long time before Jim's light showed up, and when it did show, it looked like it was 1,000 miles off. By the time I got there, the sky was beginning to get a little gray in the east. So we struck for an island and hid the raft and sunk the skiff and turned in and slept like dead people. Chapter 14. By and by, we got up, we turned over the truck. The gang had stole off the wreck and found the boots and blankets and clothes and all sorts of other things, and a lot of books and a spyglass and 3 boxes of cigars. We hadn't ever been this rich before in neither of our lives. The cigars was prime. We laid off all the afternoon in the woods talking, and me reading the books and having a general good time. I told Jim all about what happened inside the wreck and at the ferry boat, and I said these kinds of things was adventures, but he said he didn't want no more adventures. He said that when I went into Texas and he crawled back to get on the raft and found her gone, he nearly died, because he judged it was all up with him. Anyway, it could be fixed. For if he didn't get saved, he would get drowned. And if he did get saved, whoever saved him would send him back home so as to get the reward. And then Miss Watson would sell him South Shore. Well, he was right. He was most always right. He had an uncommon level head for a nigger. I read considerable to Jim about kings and dukes and earls and such, and how gaudy they dressed, and how much style they put on, and called each other your majesty, and your grace, and your lordship, and so on, instead of mister. And Jim's eyes bugged out, and he was interested, he says. I didn't know there was so many I hain't heard but none of scarcely but old King Solomon, unless you counts them kings that's in a pack of cards. How much do a king get? Get, I says. Why, they get $1,000 a month if they want it. They can have just as much as they want. Everything belongs to them. Ain't that gay? And what they got to do, Huck? They don't do nothing. Why, how you talk, they just sit around. No, is that so? Of course it is. They just sit around, except maybe when there's a wall, then they go to the wall. But other times they just lazy around or go hawking, just hawking and shh. Did you hear that noise? We skipped out and looked, but it wasn't nothing but the flutter of a steamboat's wheel away down coming around the point. So we come back. Yes, says I, and other times when things is dull, they fuss with the parliament, and if everybody don't go just so, he whacks their head off. But mostly they hang around the harem. Round the which? What's the harem? The place where he keeps his wives. Don't you know about the harem? Solomon had one. He had about 1,000,000 wives. Why, yes, that's so. I done forgot it. A harem's a boarding in house, I reckon. Most likely they has rackety times in their nursery. And I reckon the wives quarrels considerable, and that creases the racket. Yet they say Solomon the wisest man that ever lived. I don't take no stock in that. Because why would a wise man want to live in the midzers, such a bill blaming all the time? No, deed he wouldn't. A wise man to take and boil a bitter factory, and then he could shut down the bitter factory when he wants to race. Well, but he was the wisest man anyway, because the widow, she told me so her own self. I don't care what the widow say. He warn't no wise man neither. He had some the dad fetchedies ways. I ever see. Does you know about that chili that he was gwine to chop in two? Does you know about that child that he was going to chop in two? Yeah, the widow told me all about it. Well then, warn't that the beatenest notion in the world? You just take and look at it in a minute. That's the stump. That's that one of their women. Here's you. That's the other one. I, Solomon. And this your dollar bill's the child. Before on you claims it, what does I do? Does I shin around amongst the neighbors and find out which on you the bill they belong to? And hand I it over to the right one, all safe and sound, the way that anybody that had any gumption would? No, I take and whack the bill in two, and give half on it to you and the other half to the other woman. That's the way Solomon was going to do with the child. Now I want to ask you, what's the use of that half a bill? Can't buy nothing with it. And what's use in a half a child? I wouldn't give a darn for 1,000,000 on 'em. But hang it, Jim, you've clean missed the point, blame it. You've missed it 1,000 miles. Who? Me? Go long. Don't talk to me about your pants. I reckon I know sense when I sees it. And they ain't no sense in such doings as that. The spoot warn't bout a half a child. The spoot was bout a whole child. and the man that think he can settle a dispute about a whole child with a half a child. Don't know enough to come in and out the rain. Don't talk to me about Solomon Hook, I knows him by the back. But I tell you, you don't get the point. Blame the pint. I reckon I knows what I knows. And mind you, the real pint is down further. It's down deeper. It lays in the way Solomon was raised. You take a man that's got only 1 or 2 children. Is that man going to be wasteful of children? No, he ain't. He can't afford it. He know how to value 'em. But you take a man that's got about 5 million children running round the house, and it's different. He as soon chop a child in 2 as a cat. There's plenty more. A child or 2, more or less. Warrant no consequence to Solomon. Dad fetch him. I never seen such a nigger. If he got a notion in his head once, there warn't no getting it out again. He was the most down on Solomon of any nigger I ever see. So I went to talking about other kings and let Solomon slide. I told about Louis XVI that got his head cut off in France long time ago, and about his little boy, the dolphin, that would have been a king. But they took and shut him up in jail, and some say he died there. Poor little chap. But some says he got out and got away and come to America. That's good, but he'll be ooty lonesome day. Ain't no kings here, is they, Huck? No, that he can't get no situation. What he going to do? Well, I don't know. Some of them gets on the police, and some of them learns people how to talk French. Why, Huck, don't the French people talk the same way we does? No, Jim, you couldn't understand a word they said, not a single word. Well now, I be ding busted. How do that come? I don't know, but it's so. I got some of their jabber out of a book. Suppose a man was to come to say to you and say, "Parlez-vous, Franzi?" What would you think? I wouldn't think nothing. I'd take and bust him over the head. That is, if he weren't white. I wouldn't know no nigger to call me that. Shucks, it ain't calling you anything. It's only saying, do you know how to talk French? Well then, why couldn't he say it? Well, he is a-saying it. That's a Frenchman's way of saying it. Well, it's a blame ridiculous way, and I don't want to hear no more about it. There ain't no sense in it. Looky here, Jim. Does a cat talk like we do? No, a cat don't. Well, does a cow? No, a cow don't neither. Does a cat talk like a cow, or a cow talk like a cat? No, they don't. It's natural and right for them to talk different from each other, ain't it? 'Cause, and ain't it natural and right for a cat and a cow to talk different from us? Why, most surely it is. Then why ain't it natural and right for a Frenchman to talk different from us? You answer me that. Is a cat a man, Huck? No. Well then, there ain't no sense in a cat talking like a man. Is a cow a man? Is a cow a cat? No, she ain't either of them. Well then, she ain't got no business to talk like either one or the other. Well, she ain't got no business to talk like either one or the other of them. Is a Frenchman a man? Well then, dad blame it. Why don't he talk like a man? You answer me that. I see I warn't no use wasting words. You can't learn a nigger to argue. So I quit. Chapter 15. We judged that 3 nights more would fetch us to Cairo, at the bottom of Illinois, where the Ohio River comes in, and that was what we was after. We would sail the raft and get on a steamboat and go way up the Ohio amongst the free states, and then be out of trouble. Well, the second night a fog began to come on, and we made for a towhead to tie to, for it wouldn't do to try to run in fog. But when I paddled ahead in the canoe with the line to make fast, there weren't anything but little saplings to tie to. I passed the line around one of them, right on the edge of the cut bank. But there was a stiff current, and the raft come booming down so lively, she tore it out by the roots, and away she went. I see the fog closing down, and it made me so sick, I scared I couldn't budge for almost half a minute, it seemed to me, and there weren't no rafts in sight. You couldn't see 20 yards. I jumped into the canoe and run back to the stern and grabbed the paddle and set her back a stroke. But she didn't come. I was in such a hurry, I hadn't untied her. I got up and tried to untie her, but I was so excited my hands shook, I couldn't hardly do anything with them. As soon as I got started, I took out after the raft, hot and heavy, right down to the towhead. That was all right as far as it went. But the towhead weren't 60 yards long, and the minute I flew by the foot of it, I shot out into the solid white fog and hadn't no more idea which way I was going than a dead man. Thinks I, it won't do to paddle. First I know I'll run into the bank or a towhead or something. I got to sit still and float. And yet a mightily fidgety business to have to hold your hands still at such a time. I whooped and listened. Away down there somewheres I hears a small whoop, and up comes my spirits. I went tearing after it, listening, sharp to hear it again. The next time it come, I see I warn't heading for it, but heading away to the right of it. And the next time, I was heading away to the left of it, and not gaining on it much. Neither, for I was flying around. And the next time I was heading away to the left of it and not gaining on it much either, for I was flying around this way and that and t'other, but it was going straight ahead all the time. I did wish the fool would think to beat a tin pan and beat it all the time, but he never did, and it was the still places between the whoops that was making the trouble for me. Well, I fought along, and directly I hears the whoop behind me. I was tangled good now. That's somebody else's whoop, or else I was turned around. I throwed the paddle down. I heard the whoop again. It was behind me yet, but in a different place. It kept coming and kept changing its place, and I kept answering, till by and by it was in front of me again, and I know the current had swung the canoe's head downstream, and I was all right, if that was Jim and not some other raftsman hollering. I couldn't tell nothing about voices in a fog, for nothing don't look natural nor sound natural in a fog. The whooping went on, and in about a minute I come a-booming down on a cut bank with smoky ghosts of big trees on it, and the current throwed me off to the left and shot by. Amongst a lot of snags that fairly roared, the current was tearing by them so swift. In another second or two it was solid white and still again. I sit perfectly still then, listening to my heart thump, and I reckon I didn't draw a breath while it thumped 100. I just give up then. I knowed what the matter was. That cut bank was an island, and Jim had gone down t'other side of it. It warn't no towhead that you could float by in 10 minutes. It had the big timber of a regular island. It might be 5 or 6 miles long and more than half a mile wide. I kept quiet, my ears cocked. About 15 minutes, I reckon. I was floating along, of course, 4 or 5 miles an hour, but you don't ever think of that. No, you feel like you're laying dead still on the water, and if a little glimpse of a snag slips by, you don't think to yourself how fast you're going, but you catch your breath and think, my, how that snag's tearing along. If you think it ain't dismal and lonesome out in the fog that way by yourself in the night, you try it once. You'll see. Next, for about a half hour, I whoops now and then. At last I hears the answer a long ways off, and tries to follow it. But I couldn't do it, and directly I judged I'd got into a nest of towheads. for I had little dim glimpses of them on both sides of me. Sometimes just a narrow channel between them, and some that I couldn't see. I know it was there because I'd hear the wash of the current against the old dead brush and trash that hung over the banks. Well, I weren't long losing the whoops down amongst the towheads, and I only tried to chase them a little while anyway, because it was worse than chasing a jack-o'-lantern. You never know the sound dodged around so and swapped places so quick and so much. I had to claw away from the bank pretty lively 4 or 5 times to keep from knocking the island out of the river, and so I judged the raft must be butting into the bank every now and then, or else it would get further ahead and clear out of hearing. It was floating a little faster than what I was. Well, I seemed to be in the open river again by and by, but I couldn't hear no sign of a whoop nowheres. I reckon Jim had fetched up a snag, maybe, and it was all up with him. I was good and tired, so I laid down in the canoe and I said I wouldn't bother no more. I didn't want to go to sleep, of course, but I was so sleepy I couldn't help it. So I thought I would take just one little cat nap. But I reckon it was more than a cat nap, for when I waked up the stars was shining bright. But I reckon it was more than a cat nap, for when I waked up the stars was shining bright. The fog was all gone, and I was spinning down a big bend stern first. First, I didn't know where I was. I thought I was dreaming. And when things begun to come back to me, they seemed to come up dim out of last week. It was a monstrous big river here, with the tallest and the thickest kind of timber on both banks, just a solid wall, as well as I could see by the stars. I looked away downstream and seen a black speck on the water. I took out after it, but when I got to it, it weren't nothing but a couple of saw logs made fast together. Then I see another speck and chased that, then another, and this time I was right. It was the raft. When I got to it, Jim was sitting there with his head down between his knees asleep, with his right arm hanging over the steering oar. The other oar was smashed off, and the raft was littered up with leaves and branches and dirt, so she'd had a rough time. I made fast and laid down under Jim's nose on the raft and begun to gap, and stretched my fists out against Jim and says, "Hello, Jim. Have I been asleep? Why didn't you stir me up?" "Goodness gracious, is that you, Huck? And you ain't dead? You ain't drowned? You's back again? It's too good for true, honey. It's too good for true. Let me look at you, child. Let me feel on you. No, you ain't dead. You's back again, live and sound. Just the same old Huck, the same old Huck. Thanks to goodness." "What's the matter with you, Jim? You been a-drinking?" "Drinking? Has I been a-drinking? Has I had a chance to be a-drinking? Well then, what makes you talk so wild?" "How does I talk wild?" "How? Why, hain't you been talking about my coming back and all that stuff as if I had been gone away?" Huck Finn, you look me in the eye. Look me in the eye. Hain't you been gone away?" "Gone away? Why, what in the notion do you mean? I ain't gone. I ain't been gone anywheres. Where would I go to?" "Well, looky here, boss. There's something wrong, there is. Is I me, or who is I? Is I here, or why is I? Now that's what I wants to know." "Well, I think you're here, plain enough, but I think you're a tangle-headed old fool, Jim." "I is I? Will you answer me this? Didn't you tote out the line in the canoe for to make fast to the towhead?" "No, I didn't. What towhead? I ain't seen no towhead." "You ain't seen no towhead? Looky here. Didn't the line pull loose and the raft go a-humming down the river and leave you in the canoe behind in the fog?" "What fog?" "Why, the fog! The fog that's been around all night. And didn't you whoop, and didn't I whoop, till we got mixed up in the islands and one of us got lost and the other was just as good as lost? 'cause he didn't know where he was. And didn't I bust up again a lot of them islands and have a troubled time and most got drowned? Now ain't that so, boss? Ain't it so? You answer me that. Well, this is too many for me, Jim. I ain't seen no fog, nor no islands, nor no troubles, no nothing. I've been sitting here talking with you all night till you went to sleep about 10 minutes ago, and I reckon I done the same. You couldn't have got drunk in that time, so of course you've been dreaming. Dad fetch it. How's I going to dream all that in 10 minutes? Well, hang it all, you did dream it, because there didn't any of it happen. But Huck, it's all just as plain to me as, it don't make no difference how plain it is. There ain't nothing in it. I know, because I've been here all the time. Jim didn't say nothing for about 5 minutes, but sat there studying over it. Then he says, well then, I reckon I did dream it, Huck. But dog my cats if it ain't the powerfulest dream I ever see. And I ain't ever had no dream before that's tired me like this one. Oh well, that's all right, because a dream does tire a body like everything sometimes. But this one was a staving dream. Tell me all about it, Jim. So Jim went to work and told me the whole thing right through just as it happened, only he painted it up considerable. Then he said he must start in and interpret it, because it was sent for a warning. He said the first towhead stood for a man that would try to do us some good, but the current was another man that would get us away from him. The whoops was warnings that would come to us every now and then, and if we didn't try hard to make out to understand them, they'd just take us into bad luck instead of keeping us out of it. The lot of towheads was troubles we was going to get into with quarrelsome folk and all kinds of mean folks. But if we minded our business and didn't talk back and aggravate them, we would pull through and get out of the fog and into the big clear river, which was the Free States, and wouldn't have no more trouble. It had clouded up pretty dark just after I got onto the raft, but it was clearing up again now. Oh, well, that's all interpreted well enough as far as it goes, Jim, I says. But what does these things stand for? It was the leaves and rubbish on the raft, and the smashed oar. You could see them first rate now. Jim looked at the trash, then looked at me and back at the trash again. He had got the dream fixed so strong in his head that he couldn't seem to shake it loose and get the facts back into its place again right away. But when he did get the thing straightened out, he looked at me steadily without ever smiling and says, "What do they stand for? I's going to tell you. When I got all wore out with work and with the calling for you and went to sleep, my heart was most broke because you was lost. And I didn't care no more what become of me or the raft. And when I wake up and find you back again, all safe and sound, the tears come and I could have got down on my knees and kissed your foot. I'm so thankful. And all you was thinking about was how you could make a fool of old Jim with a lie. That truck that is trash. And trash is what people is that puts dirt on the head of their friends and makes them ashamed." Then he got up slow and walked to the wigwam and went in there without saying anything but that. But that was enough. It made me feel so mean I could almost kiss his foot to get him to take it back. It was 15 minutes before I could work myself up to go and humble myself to a nigger, but I done it. And I warn't ever sorry for it afterwards neither. I didn't do him no more mean tricks. And I wouldn't done that one if I'd have known it would make him feel that way. Chapter 16. We slept most all day and started out at night a little ways behind a monstrous long raft that was long going by as a procession. She had 4 long sweeps at each end, so we judged she carried as many as 30 men likely. She had 5 big wigwams aboard, wide apart, and an open campfire in the middle, and a tall flagpole at each end. There was a power of style about her. It amounted to something being a raftsman on such a craft as that. We went drifting down into a big bend. The night clouded up and got hot. The river was very wide and was walled with solid timber on both sides. You couldn't see a break in it hardly ever, or a light. We talked about Cairo and wondered whether we would know it when we got to it. I said likely we wouldn't, because I had heard say there weren't but a dozen houses there, and if they didn't happen to have them lit up, how was we going to know we was passing a town? Jim said if the two big rivers joined together there, that would show. But I said maybe we might think we was passing the foot of an island and coming into the same old river again. That disturbed Jim and me too. So the question was, what to do? I said, paddle ashore the first time a light showed and tell them Pap was behind, coming along with a trading scow, and was a green hand at the business and wanted to know how far it was to Cairo. Jim thought it was a good idea, so he took a smoke on it and waited. There weren't nothing to do now but to look out sharp for the town and not pass it without seeing it. He said he'd be mighty sure to see it, because he'd be a free man the minute he seen it. But if he missed it, he'd be in the slave country again and no more show for freedom. Every little while he jumps up and says, "Daar she is." But it warn't. It was jack-o'-lanterns or lightning bugs, so he sat down again and went to watching. Same as before. Jim said it made him all over trembly and feverish to be so close to freedom. Well, I can tell you, it made me all over trembly and feverish too to hear him, because I begun to get it through my head that he was most free, and who was to blame for it? Why, me. I couldn't get that out of my conscience. No how, no way. No how, nor no way. It got to troubling me so I couldn't resist. I couldn't stay still in one place. It hadn't ever come home to me before, what this thing was that I was doing. But now it did, and it stayed with me, and scorched me more and more. I tried to make out to myself that I weren't to blame, because I didn't run Jim off with his rightful owner, but I weren't no use. Conscience up and says every time, but you knowed he was running for his freedom, and you could have paddled ashore and told somebody. That was so. I couldn't get around that no way. That was where it pinched. Conscience says to me, what had poor Miss Watson done to you? That you could see her nigger go off right under your eyes and never say a single word. What did that poor woman do to you that you could treat her so mean? Why, she tried to learn you your book. She tried to learn you your manners. She tried to be good to you every way she knowed how. That's what she done. I got the feeling so mean and so miserable, I most wished I was dead. I fidgeted up and down the raft, abusing myself to myself, and Jim was fidgeting up and down past me. We neither of us could keep still. Every time he danced around and says, "That's Cairo," it went through me like a shot, and I thought if it was Cairo, I reckoned I would die of miserableness. Jim talked out aloud all the time while I was talking to myself. He was saying how the first thing he would do when he got to a free state, he would go to saving up money and never spend a single cent. And when he got enough, he would buy his wife, which was owned on a farm close to where Miss Watson lived. And then they would both work to buy the two children. And if their master wouldn't sell them, they'd get an abolitionist to go and steal them. It most froze me to hear such talk. He wouldn't ever dare to talk such talk in his life before. Just see what a difference it made in him the minute he judged he was about free. It was according to the old saying, give a nigger an inch and he'll take an all. Thinks I, this is what comes of my not thinking. Here was this nigger which I had a good help which I had as good as helped to run away, come right out flat-footed and saying he would steal his children. Children that belonged to a man I didn't even know, a man that hadn't ever done me no harm. I was sorry to hear Jim say that. It was such a lowering of him. My conscience got to stirring me up harder than ever until at last I says to it, "Lit up on me. It ain't too late yet. I'll paddle ashore at the first light and tell." I felt easy and happy and light as a feather right off. All my troubles was gone. I went to looking out sharp for a light and sort of singing to myself. By and by one showed. Jim sings out, "We're safe, Huck. We're safe. Jump up and crack your heels. That's the good old Cairo at last. I just knows it." I says, "I'll take the canoe and go see Jim. It might not be, you know." He jumped and got the canoe ready and put his old coat in the bottom for me to set on and give me the paddle. And as I shoved off, he says, "Pretty soon I'll be a-shouting for joy and I'll say, 'It's all on account of Huck.' I's a free man, and I couldn't ever been free if it hadn't been for Huck. Huck done it. Jim won't ever forget you, Huck. You's the best friend Jim's ever had, and you's the only friend old Jim's got now." I was paddling off, all in a sweat to tell on him, but when he says this, it seemed to kind of take the tuck all out of me. I went along slow then, and I warn't right down certain whether I was glad I started or whether I weren't. When I was 50 yards off, Jim says, "There you goes, the old true Huck, the only white gentleman that ever keep his promise to old Jim." Well, I just felt sick. But I says I got to do it. I can't get out of it. Right then, along comes a skiff with two men in it. With guns, and they stopped and I stopped. One of them says, "What's that yonder?" "A piece of raft," I says. "So you belong on it?" "Yes, sir." "Any men on it?" "Only one, sir." "Well, there's 5 niggers run off tonight, up yonder above the head of the bend. Is your man white or black?" I didn't answer up prompt. I tried to, but the words wouldn't come. I tried for a second or two to brace up and out with it, but I weren't man enough. Hadn't the spunk a rabbit. I see I was weakening, so I just give up trying and up and says, "He's white." "I reckon we'll go and see for ourselves." "I wish you would," says I, "because it's Pap that's there, and maybe you'd help me tow the raft ashore where the light is. He's sick, and so is Mam and Mary Ann." "Oh, the devil, we're in a hurry, boy, but I suppose we've got to. Come, buckle to your paddle, and let's get along." I buckled to my paddle, and they laid to their oars. When we had made a stroke or two, I says, "Pap'll be mighty much obliged to you, I can tell you. Everybody goes away when I want them to help me tow the raft ashore, and I can't do it by myself." "Well, that's infernal mean, odd too. Say, boy, what's the matter with your father?" "It's well, it ain't anything much." They stopped pulling. It warn't but a mighty little ways to the raft now. One says, "Boy, that's a lie. What is the matter with your pep? Answer up square now, and it'll be the better for you." "I will, sir. I will, honest, but don't leave us, please. It's the gentleman. If you'll only pull ahead and let me heave you the headline, you won't have to come near the raft. Please do." "Set her back, John, set her back," says one. They back the water. "Keep away, boy. Keep to Lord." Confound it, I just expect the wind has blowed it to us. Your Pat's got the smallpox, and you know it precious well. Why didn't you come out and say so? Do you want it to spread all over?" "Well," says I, blubbering, I've told everybody before, and they just went away and left us." "Poor devil, there's something in that. We are right down sorry for you, but we Well, hang it, we don't want the smallpox, you see. Look here, I'll tell you what to do. Don't you try to land by yourself, and you'll smash everything to pieces. You float along down about 20 miles, and you'll come to a town on the left-hand side of the river. It will be long after sunup then, and when you ask for help, you tell them your folks are all down with chills and fever. Don't be a fool again and let people guess what is the matter. Now we're trying to do you a kindness, so you just put 20 miles between us. That's a good boy. It wouldn't do any good to land yonder where the light is. It's only a wood yard. Say, I reckon your father's poor, and I'm bound to say he's in pretty hard luck. Here, I'll put a $20 gold piece on this board, and you get it when it floats by. I mean, mighty mean to leave you. I feel mighty mean to leave you, but my kingdom, it won't do to a fool with smallpox, don't you see? Hold on, Parker, says the man. Here's a 20 to put on the board for me. Goodbye, boy. You do as Mr. Parker told you, and you'll be all right. That's so, my boy. Goodbye, goodbye. If you see any runaway niggas, you get help and nab them, and you can make some money by it. Goodbye, sir, says I. I won't let no runaway niggas get by me if I can help it. They went off, and I got aboard the raft feeling bad and low because I knowed very well I had done wrong, and I see it warn't no use for me to try to learn to do right. A body that don't get started right when he's little ain't got no show. When the pinch comes, there ain't nothing to back him up and keep him to his work, and so he gets beat. Then I thought a minute and says to myself, hold on, suppose you done right and give Jim up. Would you feel better than what you do now? No, says I. I'd feel bad. I'd feel just the same way I do now. Well then, says I, what's the use you learning to do right when it's troublesome to do right and ain't no trouble to do wrong, and the wages is just the same? I was stuck. I couldn't answer that, so I reckoned I wouldn't bother no more about it. But after this, always do whichever comes handiest at the time. I went into the wigwam. Jim weren't there. I looked all around. He weren't anywhere. I says, Jim, here I is, Huck. Is they out of sight yet? Don't talk loud. He was in the river, under the stern oar, with just his nose out. I told him they was out of sight, so he come aboard, he says. I was a-listening to all they talk, and I slips into the river and was gwine to shove for shore if they come aboard. Then I was gwine to swim to the raft again when they was gone. But lawsy, how you did fool them, Huck. That was the smartest dodge. Tell you, child, I speak it save old Jim ain't gwine to forget you for that, honey. Then we talked about the money. It was a pretty good raise, $20 apiece. Jim said we could take deck passage on a steamboat now, and the money would last us as far as we wanted to go in the Free States. He said 20 mile more weren't far for the raft to go, but he wished he was already there. Towards daybreak, we tied up, and Jim was mighty particular about hiding the raft good. Then we worked all day fixing things in bundles and getting all ready to quit rafting. That night about 10 we hove in sight of the lights of a town away down in the left-hand bend. I went off in the canoe to ask about it. Pretty soon I found a man out in the Ava with a skiff, setting a trot line. I ranged up and says, Mister, is that town Cairo? Cairo? No, you must be a blame fool. What town is it, mister? If you want to know, go and find out. If you stay here bothering around me for about half a minute longer, you'll get something you won't want. I paddled to the raft. Jim was awful disappointed, but I said never mind. Cairo would be the next place, I reckoned. We passed another town before daylight, and I was going out again, but it was high ground, so I didn't go. No high ground about Cairo, Jim said. I had forgot it. We laid up for the day on a towhead tolerable close to the left-hand bank. I begun to suspicion something. So did Jim. I says, maybe we went by Cairo in the fog that night. He says, don't let's talk about it, Huck. Poor niggas can't have no luck. I Our olders suspected that rattlesnake skin weren't done with its work. I wish I'd never seen that snake skin, Jim. I do wish I'd never laid eyes on it. It ain't your fault, Huck. You didn't know. Don't blame yourself about it. When it was daylight, here was the clear Ohio water inshore, sure enough, and outside was the old regular muddy, so it was all up with Cairo. We talked it over. It wouldn't do to take to the shore. We couldn't take the raft upstream, of course. There weren't no way but to wait for dark and start back in the canoe and take the chances. So we slept all day amongst the cottonwood thicket so as to be fresh for the work. And when we went back to the raft about dark, the canoe was gone. We didn't say a word for a good while. There weren't anything to say. We both knowed well enough it was some more work of the rattlesnake skin, so what was the use to talk about it? It would only look like we was finding fault, and that would be bound to fetch more bad luck, and keep on fetching it too, till we knowed enough to keep still. By and by we talked about what we better do, and found there wasn't no way but just to go along down with the raft till we got a chance to buy a canoe to go back in. We weren't going to borrow it when there weren't anybody around, the way Pap would do, for that might set people after us. So we shoved out after dark on the raft. Anybody that don't believe yet, that is foolishness to handle a snake skin after all that snake skin done for us, will believe it now if they read on and see what more it done for us. The place to buy canoes is off of rafts laying at shore, but we didn't see no rafts lying up. So we went along during 3 hours or more, while the night not gray and rather thick, which is the next meanest thing to fog. You can't tell the shape of the river, and you can't see no distance. It got to be very late and still, and then along comes a steamboat up the river. We lit the lantern and judged she would see us. Upstream boats don't generally come close to us. They go out and follow the bars and hunt for easy water under the reefs. But nights like this, they bull right up the channel against the whole river. We could hear her pounding along, but we didn't see her good till she was close. She aimed right for us. Often they do that and try to see how close they can come without touching. Sometimes the wheel bites off a sweep, and then the pilot sticks his head out and laughs and thinks he's mighty smart. Well, here she comes. We said she was going to try to shave us, but she didn't seem to be shearing off a bit. She was a big one, and she was coming in a hurry too, looking like a black cloud with rows of glowworms around it. But all of a sudden, she laughed out, big and scary, with a long row of wide open furnace doors shining like red hot teeth and a monstrous bows and guards hanging right over us. There was a yell at us and a jingling of bells to stop the engines, a powwow of cussing and whistling of steam, and Jim went overboard on one side and I on the other, and she come smashing straight through the raft. I dived and I aimed to find the bottom too, for a 30-foot wheel had got to go over me, and I wanted it to have plenty of room. I could always stay underwater a minute. This time I reckon I stayed underwater a minute and a half. Then I bounced for the top in a hurry, for I was nearly bursting. I popped out to my armpits and blowed the water out of my nose and puffed a bit. Of course, there was a booming current, and of course that boat started her engines again 10 seconds after she stopped them, but they never cared much for raftsmen. So now she was churning along up the river, out of sight in the thick weather, though I could hear her. I sung out for Jim about a dozen times, but I didn't get any answer, so I grabbed a plank that touched me while I was treading water and struck out for shore, shoving it ahead of me. But I made out to see that the drift of the current was towards the left-hand shore, which meant that I was in a crossing, so I changed off and went that way. It was one of these long, slanting 2-mile crossings, so I was a good long time in getting over. I made a safe landing and clumb up the bank. I couldn't see but a little ways, but when I went poking along over rough ground for a quarter of a mile or more, then I run across a big old-fashioned double log house before I noticed it. I was going to rush by and get away, but a lot of dogs jumped out and went to howling and barking at me, and I knowed better than to move another peg. Chapter 17. In about half a minute, somebody spoke out of a window without putting his head out and says, "Be done, boys. Who's there?" I says, "It's me." "Who's me?" "George Jackson, sir." "What do you want?" "I don't want nothing, sir. I only want to go along by, but the dogs won't let me." "What are you prowling around here this time of night for, hey?" "I weren't prowling around, sir. I fell overboard off the steamboat." "Oh, you did you? Strike a light there, somebody." "What did you say your name was?" "George Jackson, sir. I'm only a boy." "Look here, if you're telling the truth, you needn't be afraid. Nobody'll hurt you. But don't try to budge. Stand right where you are. Rouse out Bob and Tom, some of you, and fetch the guns. George Jackson, is there anybody with you?" "No, sir, nobody." I heard the people stirring around in the house now and see a light. The man sung out, "Snatch that light away, Betsy, you old fool. Ain't you got any sense? Put it on the floor behind the front door. Bob, if you and Tom are ready, take your places." "All ready." "Now, George Jackson, do you know the Shepherdsons?" "No, sir, I never heard of him." "Well, that may be so, and it mayn't. Now, all ready. Step forward, George Jackson, and mind, don't you hurry, come mighty slow. If there's anybody with you, let them keep back. If he shows himself, he'll be shot. Come along now, come slow. Push the door open yourself, just enough to squeeze in, d'ye hear?" I didn't hurry. I couldn't if I wanted to. I took one slow step at a time, and there weren't a sound, only I thought I could hear my heart. The dogs were as still as the humans, but they followed a little behind me. When I got to the 3 log doorsteps, I heard them unlocking and unbarring and unbolting. I put my hand on the door and pushed it a little and a little more till somebody said, "There, that's enough. Put your head in." I done it, but I judged they would take it off. The candle was on the floor, and there they all was, looking at me, and me at them for about a quarter of a minute. 3 big men with guns pointed at me, which made me wince, I tell you. The oldest gray and about 60, the other 2 30 or more, all of them fine and handsome, and the sweetest old gray-headed lady, and back of her 2 young women, which I couldn't see right well. The old gentleman says, "There, I reckon it's all right. Come in." As soon as I was in, the old gentleman, he locked the door and barred it and bolted it and told the young men to come in with their guns. And they all went in a big parlor that had a new rag carpet on the floor and got together in a corner that was out of range of the front windows. There weren't none on the side. They held the candle, took a good look at me, and all said, "Why, he ain't a Shepherdson, no. There ain't any Shepherdson about him." Then the old man said he hoped I wouldn't mind being searched for arms because he didn't mean no harm by it. It was only to make sure. So he didn't pry into my pockets, but only felt outside with his hands and said it was all right. He told me to make myself easy and at home and tell all about myself, but the old lady says, "Why, bless you, Saul, the poor thing's as wet as he can be. And don't you reckon it may be he's hungry?" "True for you, Rachel. I forgot." So the old lady says, "Betsy," this was a nigger woman, "you fly round and get him something to eat as quick as you can, poor thing. And one of you girls go and wake up Buck and tell him, oh, here he is himself. Buck, take this little stranger and get the wet clothes off from him and dress him up in some of yours that's dry." Buck looked about as old as me, 13 or 14 or along there, though he was a little bigger than me. He hadn't on anything but a shirt, and he was very frowsy-headed. He come in gaping and digging one fist into his eyes, and he was dragging a gun along with the other one. He says, "Ain't they no Shepherdsons around? Ain't they no Shepherdsons around?" They said, "No, 'twas a false alarm." "Well," he says, "if they'd have been some, I reckon I got one." They all laughed. And Bob says, "Why, Buck, they might have scalped us all. You've been so slow in coming." "Well, nobody come after me, and it ain't right. I'm always kept down. I don't get no show." "Never mind, Buck, my boy," says the old man. "You'll have show enough, all in good time. Don't you fret about that. Go along with you now, and do as your mother told you." When we got upstairs to his room, he got me a coarse shirt and a roundabout and pants of his, and I put them on. While I was at it, he asked me what my name was. But before I could tell him, he started to telling me about a blue jay and a young rabbit he had catched in the woods the day before yesterday, and he asked me where Moses was when the candle went out. I said I didn't know. I hadn't heard about it before, no way. "Well, guess," he says. "How am I going to guess," says I, "when I never heard tell about it before?" "But you can guess, can't you? It's just as easy." "Which candle?" I says. "Why, any candle," he says. "I don't know where he was," says I. "Where was he?" "Why, he was in the dark. That's where he was." "Well, if you knowed where he was, why did you ask me for?" "Why, blame it, it's a riddle, don't you see? Say, how long are you going to stay here? You got to stay always. We can just have booming times. They don't have no school now. Do you own a dog?" "I've got a dog, and he'll go in the river and bring out chips that you throw in." "Do you like to comb up Sundays and all that kind of foolishness?" "You bet I don't, but Ma, she makes me. Confound these old britches. I reckon I'd better put 'em on." "I'd rather not. It's so warm." "But I'd rather not. It's so warm." "Are you all ready?" "All right. Come along, old hoss." Cold corn pone, cold corned beef, butter and buttermilk. That is what they had for me down there. And there ain't nothing better that ever I've come across yet. Buck and his ma and all of them smoked cob pipes, except the nigger woman, which was gone, and the two young women. They all smoked and talked, and I eat and talked. The young women had quilts around them and their hair down their backs. They all asked me questions, and I told them how Pap and me and all the family was living on a little farm down at the bottom of Arkansas, and my sister Mary Ann run off and got married and never was heard of no more. And Bill went to hunt them, and he weren't heard of no more. And Tom and Mort died, and then there weren't nobody but just me and Pap left, and he was just trimmed down to nothing on account of his troubles. So when he died, I took what there was left, because the farm didn't belong to us, and started up the river. Deck passage and fell overboard, and that was how I come to be here. So they said I couldn't have a home there as long as I wanted it. Then it was most daylight, and everybody went to bed. And I went to bed with Buck, and when I waked up in the morning, drat it all, I had forgot what my name was. So I lay there about an hour trying to think. And when Buck waked up, I says, "Can you spell Buck?" "Yes," he says. "I bet you can't spell my name," says I. I bet you what you dare I can," says he. "All right," I says. "Go ahead." Goahead. There now," he says. "Well," says I, "you done it, but I didn't think you could. I ain't no slouch of a name to spell right off without studying." I set it down private because somebody might want me to spell it next, and so I wanted to be handy with it and rattle it off like I was used to it. It was a mighty nice family and a mighty nice house too. I hadn't seen no house out in the country before that was so nice and had so much style. It didn't have an iron latch on the front door, nor a wooden one with a buckskin string, but a brass knob to turn, and the same as houses in a town. There warn't no bed in the parlor, not a sign of a bed, but heaps of parlors in towns has beds in 'em. There was a big fireplace that was bricked on the bottom, and the bricks was kept clean and red by pouring water on them and scrubbing them with another brick. Sometimes they washed them over with red water paint that they called Spanish brown. same as they do in town. They had big brass dog irons that could hold up a saw log. There was a clock on the middle of the mantelpiece with a picture of a town painted on the bottom half of the glass front, and a round place in the middle of it for the sun. Then you could see the pendulum swing behind it. It was beautiful to hear that clock tick, and sometimes when one of these peddlers had been along and scoured her up and got her in good shape, she would start in and strike 150 before she got tuckered out. They wouldn't took any money for her. Well, there was a big outlandish parrot on each side of the clock made out of something like chalk and painted up gaudy. By one of the parrots was a cat made of crockery, and a crockery dog by the other, and when you pressed down on them they squeaked, but didn't open their mouths nor look different nor interested. They squeaked through underneath. There was a couple of big wild turkey wing fans spread out behind those things. On a table in the middle of the room was a kind of lovely crockery basket that had apples and oranges and peaches and grapes piled up in it, which was much redder and yellower and prettier than real ones is. But they weren't real because you could see where pieces had got chipped off and show the white chalk or whatever it was underneath. The table had a cover made out of a beautiful oilcloth with a red and blue spread eagle painted on it and a painted border all round. It come all the way from Philadelphia, they said. There were some books, too, piled up perfectly exact on each corner of the table. One was a big family Bible full of pictures. One was Pilgrim's Progress, about a man that left his family. It didn't say why. I read considerable in it now and then. The statements was interesting but tough. Another was Friendship's Offering, full of beautiful stuff and poetry, but I didn't read the poetry. Another was Henry Clay's speeches, and another was Dr. Gunn's Family Medicine, which told you all about what to do if a body was sick or dead. And there was a hymn book, and a lot of other books, and there was nice split-bottom chairs, and perfectly sound too, not bagged down in the middle and busted like an old basket. They had pictures hung on the walls, mainly Washingtons and Lafayettes and battles and Highland Marys, and one called Singing the Declaration. There was some that they called crayons, which one of the daughters, which was dead, made her own self when she was only 15 years old. They was different from any pictures I ever see before, blacker mostly than it's common. One was a woman in a slim black dress, belted small under the armpits with bulges like a cabbage in the middle of the sleeves, and a large black scoop shovel bonnet with a black veil, and white slim ankles crossed about with black tape, and very wee black slippers like a chisel, and she was leaning pensive on a tombstone on her right elbow under a weeping willow, and her other hand hanging down her side holding a white handkerchief and a reticule. And underneath the picture it said, "Shall I never see thee more, Alice? Shall I never see thee more, alas?" Another one was a young lady with her hair all combed up straight to the top of her head and knotted there in front of a comb like a chair back, and she was crying into a handkerchief and had a dead bird laying on its back in her other hand with its heels up, and underneath the picture it said, "I shall never hear thy sweet chirrup more, alas." There was one where a young lady was at a window looking up at the moon, and tears running down her cheeks, and she had an open letter in one hand with black sealing wax showing on one edge of it, and she was mashing a locket with a chain to it against her mouth, and underneath the picture it said, "And art thou gone? Yes, thou art gone, alas." These was all nice pictures, I reckon, but I didn't somehow seem to take to them, because if ever I was down a little, they always give me the fantards. Everybody was sorry she died, because she had laid out a lot more of these pictures to do, and the body could see by what she had done what they had lost. But I reckon that with her disposition she was having a better time in the graveyard. She was at work on what they said was her greatest picture when she took sick, and every day and every night it was her prayer to be allowed to live till she got it done, but she never got the chance. It was a picture of a young woman in a long white gown, standing on the rail of a bridge all ready to jump off, with her hair all down her back and looking up to the moon with the tears running down her face. And she had 2 arms folded across her breast, and 2 arms stretched out in front, and 2 more reaching up towards the moon. And the idea was to see which pair would look best, and then scratch out all the other arms. But as I was saying, she died before she got her mind made up. And now they kept this picture over the head of her bed in her room, and every time her birthday come, they hung flowers on it. Other times it was hid with a little curtain. The young woman in the picture had a kind of a nice sweet face, but there were so many arms it made her look too spidery, seemed to me. This young girl kept a scrapbook when she was alive, and used to paste obituaries and accidents and cases of patients suffering in it out of the Presbyterian Observer, and write poetry after them out of her own head. It was very good poetry. This is what she wrote about a boy by the name of Stephen Dowling Botts that fell down a well and was drowned. Ode to Stephen Dowling Botts, deceased. Ode to Stephen Dowling Botts, deceased. And did young Stephen sicken? And did young Stephen die? And did the sad hearts thicken? And did the mourners cry? No, such was not the fate of young Stephen Dowling Botts. Though sad hearts round him thickened, 'twas not from sickness shots. No whooping cough did rack his frame, nor measles drear with spots. Not these impair the sacred name of Stephen Dowling Botts. Despised love struck not with woe that head of curly knots, nor stomach troubles laid him low, young Stephen Dowling Botts. Oh no, then list with tearful eye, whilst I his fate do tell. His soul did from his cold world fly, by falling down a well. They got him out and emptied him. Alas, it was too late. His spirit was gone for to sport aloft in the realms of the good and great. If Emmeline Grangerfold could make poetry like that before she was 14, there ain't no telling what she could have done by and by. Buck said she could rattle off poetry like nothing. She didn't ever have to stop to think. He said she would slap down a line, and if she couldn't find anything to rhyme with it, she would just scratch it out and slap down another one and go ahead. She weren't particular. She could write about anything you choose to give her to write about, just so it was sadful. Every time a man died or a woman died or a child died, she would be on hand with a tribute before he was cold. She called them tributes. The neighbors said it was the doctor first, then Emmeline, then the undertaker. The undertaker never got in ahead of Emmeline but once, and then she sung fire on a rhyme, the dead person's name, which was Whistler. She warn't ever the same after that. She never complained, but she kind of pined away and did not live long. Poor thing. Many's the time I made myself go up to the little room that used to be hers and get out her poor old scrapbook and read in it when her pictures had been aggravating me and I had soured on her a little. I liked all that family, dead ones and all, and wasn't going to let anything come between us. Poor Emmeline made poetry about all the dead people when she was alive. And it didn't seem right that there weren't nobody to make some about her now she was gone. So I tried to sweat out a verse or two myself, but I couldn't seem to make it go somehow. They kept Emmeline's room trim and nice, and all the things fixed in it just the way she liked to have them when she was alive, and nobody ever slept there. The old lady took care of her room herself, though there were plenty of niggers, and she sewed there a good deal and read her Bible there mostly. Well, as I was saying about the parlor, there was beautiful curtains on the windows, white, with pictures painted on them of castles with vines all down the walls, and cattle coming down to drink, There was a little old piano, too, that had tin pans in it, I reckon, and nothing was ever so lovely as to hear the young lady sing "The Last Link is Broken" and play "The Battle of Prague" on it. The walls of all the rooms was plastered, and most had carpets on the floors, and the whole house was whitewashed on the outside. It was a double house, and the big open place betwixt them was roofed and floored, and sometimes the table was set there in the middle of the day, and it was a cool, comfortable place. Nothing couldn't be better, and warn't the cooking good, and just bushels of it too.